Crime and Punishment, an audio revision guide, 1500 to 1700. The hue and cry continued to be used in the early modern period and was led by the constable, which was still an unpaid and part-time job. They did not go out on patrol and had the power to inflict some punishment, such as the whipping of vagabonds. Coroners still investigated unnatural deaths. In addition to this, the early modern era saw the introduction of justices of the peace and town watchmen. Justices of the peace judged manor court cases, fining people, sending them to the stocks or pillories, or ordering them to be whipped. Justices of the peace met quarterly to judge the most serious cases. They had the power to sentence criminals to death, and in this era, those accused of serious crimes could not claim benefit of the clergy. Town watchmen patrolled towns. They had the authority to peer into windows and were expected to punish vagabonds and were able to hand out minor punishments. However, they were confined to larger towns, were poorly paid, and often were of little use. Rewards were offered for the arrest of particular criminals accused of serious crimes, and these could be very high, sometimes equal to a year's income for a middle-class family. The Habeas Corpus Act of 1679 entitled everyone who was arrested to either a court case or release. County assessors, royal judges, visited every county twice a year to judge the most serious cases. Punishments also used in this era were mostly fines used for minor offences. Stocks and pillories were used, as were whipping. Houses of correction were built where inmates were whipped and forced to do hard labour, an early attempt at reformation. Prisons, however, were only used for those awaiting trial or in debt. Ducking stalls were used for women who argued with their husbands or swore in public. Transportation was used from the 1660s onwards, at first sending criminals to the American colonies. The introduction of the Bloody Code occurred at a time when the crime rates appeared to be falling. The government who passed the Bloody Code were wealthy landowners who saw the poor as a threat to their property and privileges, believing that harsh punishments would keep them in their place. Because crime was becoming more publicised, it appeared to rise. Pamphlets were cheap and readily available, frequently carrying stories of crime. Though public executions were intended to deter people and reduce crime, public executions and the publishing of the speeches of criminals about to be hung also increased people's awareness of crime. Since the Middle Ages, towns had grown in size and population. Criminals could evade capture more easily on the crowded streets, and the hue and cry became less effective as people did not know their neighbours. During the Middle Ages, witchcraft had been dealt with by the more lenient church courts. However, under Henry VIII, Elizabeth I and James I, laws were tightened and witchcraft became a serious crime. The religious unrest led to a heightened fear of the devil and a fear that good Christians could be tempted away from God and towards crime. Between 1647 and 49, in a country racked by civil war which prevented royal judges from travelling, Matthew Hopkins searched East Anglia for witches. He was paid fees and expenses for his time by villagers across the region. In return, he would identify suspects and obtain confessions. 36 people were accused of being witches by him during this time, mostly elderly women. They were kept standing and moving for days on end. If a mouse, rat or fly found its way into the room, Hopkins claimed it was their familiar. If they had a scar, boil or spot, this was where the familiar was said to suck the witch's blood. This was named a devil's mark. Using a trial similar to the trial by cold water, witches were put into water. If they floated, they were checked for the devil's mark as final proof before execution. Vagabondage was also feared during this period. By the 16th century, a growing population and fewer jobs, falling wages and poorer harvests meant that many people had to move around in search of work. There was a suspicion that vagabonds were professional criminals who chose not to work, but in reality they were mostly ordinary unemployed people in search of work. Some vagabonds were demobilised soldiers, made redundant by the ending of wars. Wealthier members of the community already paid a poor rate, a tax paid to provide relief to the poor in their community, and did not want this money to go to poor people from other areas. Between 1531 and 1598, a series of vagrancy acts were introduced in an attempt to deter. Vagabonds were whipped, mutilated, and, in certain years, even given capital punishment.